Today is about hearing from government, Post Office Limited, and the opportunity to take part in the NFSP open debates being held this afternoon. Each of our guest speakers will be taking questions from the floor, and there will be a Q&A session with the Post Office after coffee, where you will again be able to ask questions. I would ask that your questions are broad-based and general, rather than branch-specific. And I know I can rely on you to be respectful of those on stage at all times. So without a further delay, please welcome on stage the Post Office Affairs Minister, Mr. Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Sarge. Good morning, everyone. And I hear Sue's challenge to us very, very clearly. When I grew up in my local town, Easingwold, which I still represent that area today, the pillars of the local community were Mr. Clark, the baker. It was Mr. Taylor, the bank manager. It was Mr. Thornton, the butcher. It was Mr. Hollinrake, the milkman. And it was Mr. Hodgson, the postmaster, and they were very formative years. It's now Pritpal who runs that post office, and he's the only person of that collection of people that really I would know in out my hometown of Easingwold. And that's how important postmasters are to our community, and it's good to see the network has survived when many other businesses have not. So I'm somebody who massively believes in the value of postmasters to our community. It is great to be here for the very first time, for my first ever NFSP conference. I'm fully aware that I'm not your first ever Post Office Minister. You've had a number of changes in recent months, but I'm also fully aware of the very, very proud 400-year history of the Post Office network. And I'm all too aware of the last 20 years have been the toughest times in that history. But I want you to be fully aware of my commitment to make sure we get things right, we put things right, and we move to a well-run and sustainable and profitable network. Not just profitable for Post Office Limited, but profitable from every single branch in the UK. So it's been really good. I've really enjoyed getting to meet many of you in recent months and learning much more about this great British institution. I must say, having arrived here at midnight last night, I was tempted but declined to join you in the bar last night. There was still quite a lot happening in there. It sounded like great fun, but I thought it was probably wise not to at that point in time. But I know that the Post Office has this very proud history. It's something Callum and his team are very, very proud of. Not just the network itself, but its proud history of innovation. And that's something we should all be particularly passionate about. I am very confident that our post offices and postmasters can evolve and thrive. From the humble beginnings of the post office back 400 years ago, just almost 400 years ago, the post office now serves millions of customers every week through its network of over 11,500 branches, more than all the banks and building societies branches combined. And it supports nearly 50,000 jobs, approximately the same number of full-time employees as there are in a city the size of Exeter. But one thing that hasn't changed, in my opinion, is the way that post offices and postmasters still have their finger on the pulse of what matters to people. Our postmasters are the beating heart of our communities. And this is something I saw very clearly. I recently visited a post office in Aberystwyth, and I probably haven't pronounced that very well. It's obviously in Wales near Newport, but very inspired by just how much the postmaster there, Shabazz Akram, really cared for his community, how hard he worked for the community and for his staff, and the very significant contribution and investment he has made to build a sustainable business, a multifaceted business. I know that story is by no means unique. And as Sue said, I was particularly proud to see the very important role our post office played during the COVID lockdowns, with many unsung heroes going above and beyond the call of duty, delivering essentials like prescriptions to the most isolated and vulnerable. More recently, postmasters in Northern Ireland stepped up admirably, processing energy bills support scheme vouchers. Postmasters are crucial pillars of the community up and down the nation. I know that care and compassion is reciprocated by the general public, who rightly hold their postmasters and post offices in very high regard. And this is not least reflected by the many concerns raised by my fellow parliamentarians when issues arise. I've sometimes seen the post office referred to as an unseen part of our national infrastructure. Perhaps it's true that post offices have become so seamlessly woven into our lives that they blend into the landscape as much as any medieval bridge or ancient oak tree. But that doesn't mean their impact isn't still seen, felt or appreciated. And it's certainly true when it comes to our national economy. You will not have been surprised to learn that a recent London economics report found that the post office generated an economic impact of £4.7 billion across the UK in 2021-2022. That is a phenomenal amount. And what's more, the post office doesn't just generate value for itself, it enables and empowers other SMEs too. Obviously, that's something very important to me to hear as the Minister responsible for small business. I'm not just a Minister for small business, actually. For the majority of my life, my working life, for 30 years, I was in business myself, and I absolutely lived and breathed business in my own business, and I've tried to do that and try to represent business's best interest in my time as a parliamentarian. The vast majority of time that has been a backbencher. Indeed, some of the campaigning for some of the issues the post office network has suffered over recent years. So I do know what it's like to lay awake at night wondering how you're going to pay the bills. I'm very fond of Churchill's saying about private enterprise. He said, some see private enterprise as a predatory tiger that needs to be shot. Some see it as a cow that needs to be milked. Others see it, a few see it, he said, for what it really is, the strong horse that pulls the whole cart. So private enterprise, and obviously you represent the best of private enterprise, is critical to our economy, and I'm delighted to be the Minister that represents it. The LSE report also found that more than 40% of visits to post office branches resulted in money then being spent in neighbouring shops and premises to the tune of more than £3 billion a year. So it's pretty simple, really. When post offices do well, everyone does well. But of course, like running any business, being a postmaster doesn't come without its fair share of challenges. And we recognise the strain that network's under, and we are helping where we can. As Stu challenged us, I fully understand the pressure that rising costs has brought upon your business. That's why the autumn statement, the government stepped in with a business rate package worth £13.6 billion over 5 years. And we extended increased relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses worth almost £2.1 billion. This is the most generous business rates relief in over 30 years outside of COVID-19 support. That, of course, on top of things like the energy support package, employment allowance and other concessions we've made to try and help businesses get through a difficult time. But I think most people and most business people accept that there are limits to what the government can do. Like many other high street businesses, business for post offices is tough, mainly due to changing consumer behaviour. There is no silver bullet or magic wand solution for the problems you are facing. We have to keep working together on the issues which matter to postmasters. For example, I know from conversations with businesses in my own constituency just how frustrating the cash deposit limit issue is for postmasters and their customers alike. Legitimate, hard-working businesses who are cash reliant, usually small businesses, of course, are finding themselves unable to pay their own money into their own accounts. This not only impacts cash flow, it hinders business growth also. Clearly, this is not right. With banks shutting branches, banking services at the post office are only going to become more important to our communities in the future. So I'm committed to solving this problem. I've had a number of meetings with officials and the bank's representative organisations about this, and will continue to do so, and to work with colleagues at the Post Office, the Treasury, the banks and the Financial Conduct Authority to seek that resolution. We are also working hard to correct the horrendous historic wrongs of the Post Office Horizon accounting scandal. One element of this was a perverse paradox that those people who exposed the scandal in the first place, the postmasters who won the court case against the Post Office, ended up receiving less compensation than their peers, simply due to how their cases were funded. We will make sure all victims get fair compensation that they deserve. And I was pleased to recently launch the Group Litigation Order Compensation Scheme on the 23rd of March. I know that no words, no amount of money can ever fully right the wrongs inflicted upon postmasters and their families. There are some key principles that will drive our actions: parity across the 3 different compensation schemes, and restore the finances to those affected to the position they were prior to the detriment taking place. To do so, I have made sure that the advisory board, which contains key parliamentarians and other campaigners, including Kevin Jones, Lord Arbuthnot and Professor Moorhead, sit on that board and sit across all 3 schemes to make sure we get that fairness and parity. We're also working on some of the issues people have seen in terms of tax treatment, of compensation, and those suffering bankruptcy. Again, if bankruptcy was caused by the accounting scandal, people should be returned back to their finances, should be returned to the position they were prior to that taking place. We're also making sure interim payments are available in all 3 schemes. I do hope the progress we are making on these schemes is of some comfort to those who have fought and continue to fight so hard for justice. Righting the wrongs of the past is an important step in supporting the Post Office and postmasters towards a brighter future. And that is something the government is absolutely committed to doing. We want the Post Office to remain the valuable and valued national asset it is. We want the Post Office to be attracting new generations of energetic and entrepreneurial postmasters. We want the Post Office to be secure and sustainable in the long term. That's why the government has provided over £2.5 billion of funding to support the network over the last 10 years, and why we're providing a further £335 million between 2022 and 2025, including the £50 million a year subsidy to safeguard services in the uncommercial parts of the network. The working group meetings I have with Post Office and the National Federation of Postmasters have provided me and my predecessors with a really important forum to discuss important issues and hear the perspective of postmasters. I greatly enjoyed my first one in March. It is clear from my conversations with Nick and Callum that Post Office must continue to adapt and innovate to meet the challenges facing the postal sector. Post Office have already forged new partnerships with Amazon, DPD, Every and DHL, which are positive steps to diversify the business. I'm excited to see how this work evolves as Post Office focuses on improving the offering from other carriers, both in Post Office branches and online. Preserving, promoting and progressing our post offices is not about nostalgia, it's about necessity. This is a service people need, people want and people value. The Post Office has made good progress in recent years to adapt, build on its strengths and become more competitive. I know that postmasters are a huge part of driving that effort. Not just in delivering decisions made on high, but in speaking up for what they and their customers need. Quite simply, there is no post office without postmasters. So I'd like to end by saying a big thank you to each and every one of you for your contributions to your communities and to our country's shared prosperity. I look forward to continuing to work closely with Callum and the NFSP, Nick and his team at Post Office Limited, as well as other stakeholders to ensure that our post office network is fighting fit for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Minister for his speech, and he will now take a few questions from the floor. Please, can you raise your hands, and when you are asked, say your name and your region, please. We've got some roaring microphones.
Good morning. Christine Donnelly, North Thames and East Anglia, but cunningly disguised as Howard Greenham from the Southwest region. Howard is a sub-postmaster and, incidentally, a Conservative county councillor. He had prepared a question for you, but unfortunately now has COVID. It's a question that needs to be heard, so I'm doing it. A year ago, as your predecessor Paul Scully stood there, we all heralded the commitment to reset the relationship between post office and sub-postmasters. A year later, that reset has meant the tragic death of 59 sub-postmasters before they received their compensation. That reset has meant the scandalous lies over compensation payments to support wild bonus claims. That reset has meant the top 20 members of the Post Office Board receiving £6 million in salaries, whilst over 60% of sub-postmasters earn less than the minimum wage. That reset has meant post office income being 838 million, whilst a paltry 320 million found its way into sub-postmaster remuneration. Whoops. That reset has meant... Sorry, I'm going to swap. That reset has meant postmaster income... Oh, sorry, lost my place. That reset has meant remuneration for banking products to post office to the tune of 205 million, whilst only 56 million, a mere 27.5%, found its way to the post office network. I'm afraid, Minister, the post office has not been a clever place to be under your watch. The Post Office Board is not an asset, it's a liability to you, to us, and the wider public. In about 7 years' time, the grant funding agreement expires. There is no plan in place to ensure the sustainability of the post office network beyond that. And I put it to you that you will not be in post then. And we certainly hope the Post Office Board will not be either. Meanwhile, there will be those of us still trying to make the network work. And yet, demonstrably, we do not even need the grant funding agreement. We're not even asking for more money from government. It's not the income that's wrong, it's the distribution of it that is. The answer to the question I'm asking then must be obvious. Why do you not strip out the Post Office Board in its entirety and mutualise the post office as a matter of urgency? As you look across this conference floor, you will see former captains of industry, chemists, CEOs of business, etc. Post Office do not have the monopoly on ability, capability, or intelligence. So the answer must be simple, and I ask this not for my sake, not even for the sake of the NFSP, but for the sake of 11,500 post offices in 11,500 communities in 650 constituencies across the UK. Strip out the Post Office Board from your cost base, mutualise the post office, and given that we have around £3 billion invested in the network, let us who own the business run the business. Nothing less will do.
Well, thanks, Christine, and I hope the COVID situation improves very slowly. First of all, touching on the 59 sub-postmasters who passed away this year waiting compensation, that's a tragic situation, of course, and of course there's always a balance to be struck between getting the compensation out the door quickly and making sure it's the right level of compensation. So, and you get pressure from both sides. The government set aside £1 billion as a figure to make sure people are properly compensated. We've got to deliver that money as quickly as possible. We've got to make sure the schemes are fair. So it's a balance that needs to be struck. it's obviously a tragic situation for those families, but should that situation happen, the families do get the money. It's not as if there's a saving of money in that situation, but of course we want to get that money out the door as quickly as possible. In terms of we all want a sustainable network, and we all want to make sure a greater proportion of revenue goes to the people at Sharp End. We know, I hear time and time again how tough things are at a postmaster level, and I've heard that point been raised a number of times about working below the national living wage. It's not a situation anyone wants to see, and it's clearly an unsustainable situation if you're in business for that to be the case, considering the pressures of being in business in the first place. So I quite understand that. We've got to find the right solution. Interesting that Sue in her speech at the start there talks about, is 11,500 the right number? Is that putting pressure on other parts of the network? We've got to have a frank and open discussion about what the network is going forward. You can understand from my perspective and from other people in government, we get lots of pressures when post offices do close. So again, there's a balance to be struck between the two. And there is a lot of taxpayers' money already going into the network. We want to see that sustainable network as well. It's not as if the government has a blank cheque. This year we spent around just under £200 billion more than we collected in taxes. The funding rounds are very difficult right now to try and find extra money. So moving to a more sustainable network is absolutely where we want to go. Is mutualisation the right answer? We should look at all different options, but I would say before you get to a mutualisation position, you've got to have a sustainable network, otherwise it'll continue to just draw on everybody's resources. So it's a difficult conversation to have on a number of different political levels, but do we want the same things you want to make sure you earn more money and are able to run sustainable businesses? Absolutely we do, because we won't have a post office network without that position.
Next question.
Minister Hollinrake, David Ward, East Barkwith Post Office, Lincoln and Grimsby branch. My good friend Sir Edward Lee stood up in the House and asked you a similar question, and I really can't top that, other than the £360 million, which figure that we hear may be costing for the historic discrepancies, horizon difficulties. Do you think that postmasters should be paying that? I don't think they should.
Edward Lee's been a big champion of mutualisation, as I have too in previous conversations about previous things. I'm a big believer in mutuals, both in building societies, as you know, mutuals. We used to have mutual banks in the UK, which were very successful. It was some time ago now, but every other G7 economy has mutual banks. There's a lot to be said for mutualisation, and if there's a way through that, then I'm keen to explore that. Well, as I say, we need to move to a financially sustainable network, however it's run. In terms of who's paying what, I say the government's committed to paying all the compensation for the postmasters for that detriment. Is it right also that the post office makes a contribution in terms of its time in trying to rectify past wrongs? I think that is a reasonable position, that the post office management does play a role within that in making sure that compensation is delivered. Because yes, of course, there's a case to answer against some of the things that were done within my department, and I think there's clearly a case to answer more widely, and to answer Sue's position about question about people being held to account. That's what the inquiries they're looking at now. It's important that we go through due process, but it's right, I think the taxpayer picks up the tab for the compensation. I think it's also right that the post office makes a contribution in terms of its time and resources, in terms of making sure the administration of the scheme is done properly. I hasten to add again, of course, the decisions on compensation are not made by the post office. All those schemes, there is independent scrutiny of those schemes, both in terms of the advisory board and a decision-making panel. So it's not about making decisions, but it is about putting the work into fight to make sure the information is delivered appropriately.
I think the question is, it appears to us that the 365 million is coming from the postmasters. Yes, post office can be held accountable, but that money is actually being taken away from our remuneration. Put aside.
I understand the concerns, but there's only two places can pay for this. It's either post office or it's the taxpayer. We think there's a balance got to be struck between the taxpayer picking up the compensation and who does the actual administration work within the post office itself. Should the taxpayer pay for everything, including that work, That's a question that was answered by a previous, in previous decision by government. That's the position we're in right now.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you for attending NFSP conference.
Pleasure.
Your opening speech and the words were very encouraging, that you want the post office network and you want us to be sustainable. But I have very much doubts and serious concerns as to whether the government actually wants the network of the post offices to survive. Because you'll also say that, we've committed to 11,500 post offices. But in fact, our businesses have not been sustainable for a very long time. It's no point in dragging on the ailing businesses where all the money is going in different directions. If the government wants the network to provide the services to all communities, then we need to adopt a different governance structure. This could be in a form of an oversight committee, as this will ensure greater openness and transparency that has not been in existence for a long time in Post Office Limited. Just one example is, do we know where the subsidy is going? No, we don't know how that's accounted for. By doing the oversight committee, it will also prevent the mistakes made in the past that destroyed the people's lives that you just mentioned yourself. But on top of that, my heart bleeds for my colleagues currently now in business. Why should we be paying for the mistakes of the post offices? Because our remuneration is not sustainable and we are providing a personal income from the shops and other means. Other people are taking jobs to support the post office, which can't be right. If you want to keep the reputation of the post office as a trusted brand, and don't forget that's only because of the postmasters, because we are the face of the post office to the customers. You must be protected, that brand must be protected by putting an oversight committee who will ensure that post office is doing what's good for the post office network. If you have said several times in your speech that you do want to see, the government wants to see a sustainable network. But if it's not going to come and if they're only words, then, just think about a sensible and a fair closure programs to let us realize our investment. We put our money, our life and our blood into our businesses. If we're not going to see any retirement out of it, please give us compensation and let us go. So, Minister, I've got two questions. Which option will you be taking? Will you be taking a good governance on the Post Office Limited to see how they behave and how they get accounted for their decisions? Or would you rather give us a closure program, compensate us, and let us leave with some kind of retirement pot? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your points. First and foremost, the government isn't it might seem like at times, some remote entity. Government is made up of members of Parliament. We are from our communities. I was born and brought up in my community, as I tried to say right at the start. Do we want the post office network to survive and post office to survive? Absolutely we do. We know how important it is to our constituents, our communities. So, yes, we do. Sustainability, I agree with. We need to get to a sustainable position. A lot of that's got to be driven by consumer demand. How do we make sure you have services that people want to access within your post offices? That's one of the biggest issues I think you are seeing, is declining revenue as well as increased costs. Increased costs will start to ease for businesses and have started to ease already. That will continue to ease, but we need to make sure the top line is healthier, that more people use your services, and I referred to some of those things in my speech, but I'm very happy to look at other ways we can do that, not least in terms of the future opportunities of banking and banking hubs, for example, which I do think is an opportunity. In terms of good governance, yes, absolutely we want good governance. We were very concerned about the recent situation with misstating of the accounts, of course, and that's something we're putting an independent review in to look at exactly what the situation is there in terms of governance of the board right now. In terms of oversight from postmasters, as you know, we've got two postmasters now sit on the board, which I have met, which I think is a step forward. In terms of future models of governance, very happy to listen to different models of how that will be to restore the confidence between the most vital part of the network, but clearly the customer face of the network, which is yourselves and the Post Office Board. In terms of closure programme, the Hard to Place programme, of course, changed in terms of, as Sue said, in terms of its level of remuneration and compensation, but it'd make it more available so people weren't stuck in a situation where they had this figure dangling ahead that they couldn't access. It is a lower figure, but more people can access it. It's a balance that needed to be struck, and I think it's been struck, and very happy to hear from people in the room about where that balance is in the right place.
Right, Sue, and then Harry, and that's it. The Minister has agreed to stay behind a coffee, so if anybody wants to ask any questions, he will come round at coffee time. Stay on your tables, but we must move on. So Sue and then Harry, and that's it then, for questioning.
Thank you, Sard. Minister Hollinrake, I'm going to follow on from what you've just said regarding the hard-to-place officers, and I know Sue covered it this morning as well. Via the Network Transformation Programme, government provided £2.4 billion of taxpayers' money for the transformation of the whole network, which the Post Office gratefully received. There are now questions to be answered as to how that money was spent. Given the fact that the postmasters classed as hard to place signed in good faith in 2015 an agreement that allowed them to leave the network with 26 months of a leavers payment, is it legally or morally right that the Post Office now impose a different agreement that reduces that leaver payment to just 12 months, which, if the full amount was paid, may well reduce Post Office's profits and therefore senior executive bonus payments? Does the Minister personally feel that something is better than nothing? We don't. Thank you.
Well, in terms of seeing where any money went to in the Post Office, of course, you can access their accounts, which have obviously caused some controversy over recent weeks, but so see where money goes in and where it goes out. One thing I've been clear to the Post Office when I sat down with them talking about how we move to that sustainable network, it can't just be about, it's got to be about reducing central costs as well. It's got to be about, the most important part of the network is the customer-facing part of the network. So we've got to make sure the network runs more efficiently. That's one of the reasons, one of the ways we get through to a more sustainable network, and obviously that's important in terms of remuneration. So in terms of the hard to place, it was a difficult balance to strike. Yes, there was the 26-week figure, but people couldn't access it. That was the reality. Is a bird in the hand worth two in the bush? In my view, it would be. Clearly, it's an option people can take now before they had an option that they couldn't take. So I certainly take your point, but I think it's probably the lesser of two evils would be my description of it.
Good morning, Minister. John Shepherd, York and Hull Branch, the North East Regional Council. Thank you for taking time today to engage with us and to hear firsthand our concerns and hopes for the future. Firstly, I fully support my honourable colleague Howard Greenham's views and would like to see positive change come out of the Post Office management current bonus gate scandal. I don't just mean slotting replacement people into roles that may become vacant, but the opportunity taken to move towards mutuality and postmasters directing and running our business to enhance our lifetime investments. So my question today to you is, what are government's plans for the future of Post Office? And for us, as investing postmasters as currently, we feel we're on a death sentence with our business viability being undermined as we go along. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, John. We were obviously also very concerned about the bonus situation, about it relating to the sub-metric relating to the inquiry, and that's something we put in an independent review of the situation to look at the situation generally in terms of remuneration governance. Mutuality, I won't go through that again because I've talked about it before, but I think instinctively something I'm attracted to. I think the key thing you've got to do, though, is get the network to a sustainable position. And that's about looking at network transformation, being honest about consumer demand and not spreading things too thinly, and I think we have to have that conversation about it. But I'm very keen to make sure we do have that conversation and that we, by reforms to both central costs of the post office and in terms of things like which could also impact upon positively in terms of remuneration and in terms of network generally, network size generally, and how we provide a network for the future that public can access, that you remaining at the heart of the local community. I'm very keen to engage in that discussion with people in this room and with the board, of course.
Can you take one more? Harry?
Yeah.
Good morning, Minister. Harry Garai, London Region.
Morning.
Very pleased to hear, and I actually do remember the pillars of the community that you were talking about earlier. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't exist anymore. But anyway, unless the remuneration payments reflect the work that is involved, more offices will close as postmasters cannot cover increasing costs. For example, the recent 20% increase in banking in real terms is an increase from £1.25 per thousand to £1.50 per thousand. Meanwhile, employee national minimum wage, national insurance contributions have increased, as have energy, food, council tax and business rates. Please, can you tell me, as a representative of the government, the sole owners, tell me how this 25p increase will help me stay open in my community?
Harry, thank you for your question and your point. And I totally understand. You know, we want to see that remuneration increase to a level where, you know, whether it's 20% or whatever it is, if it doesn't make a tangible difference, it doesn't make a tangible difference. We need to make sure that it actually means you've got sustainable businesses you can run. We've got to accept a big part of this is what's happened to the high street generally, which is driven by consumers, not by anything the government's doing, and you have limited room for manoeuvre in terms of what you can do, other than we know the high street is changing and we can diversify all our businesses to make sure that our businesses do provide services that customers want alongside post office services. So I think that's part of the opportunity. I've seen that in my travels around different post offices. So there's two things we need to look at: how you diversify your business, you can your end, how we can do that in terms of the post office, in terms of the Post Office Limited, in terms of a greater opportunity through different carriers, for example, or through the banking hub opportunity, and of course through remuneration. I've heard that loud and clear. One of the greatest business books written of all time with Jim Collins, Good to Great. One of the key principles is you've got to confront the brutal facts. I've heard the brutal facts loud and clear. I'm very keen to try and find you a solution to them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.